We'll talk
Thank
with
you.
Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Was this a case of both sides, recognizing this is going nowhere except getting worse to our mutual disadvantage? Therefore, let's do a deal, even though maybe neither of us really want to do it.
Richard, I think you broke the code here. My experience in negotiations basically is that parties come to conclusion and make tough decisions when there's urgency, when the pain of doing the agreement is somewhat lessened for not doing it. And I think Israel wanted this agreement and Hezbollah needed it. And as a consequence, what you have is a transaction. Let's be clear. You have a transaction. You don't have a transformation. The Israeli-Hezbollah rivalry is going to continue. I suspect the Israelis will continue to operate north of the Litani River, for example, in order to staunch weapons deliveries from Iran via Syria into Lebanon. The Lebanese government, I don't think, is somehow going to magically discover its political courage and challenge Hezbollah, since Hezbollah will remain the primary and most powerful, formidable decision maker. Will the Lebanese armed forces, which are supposed to deploy to the south, actually prevent and preempt violations if Hezbollah violates the accord? And finally, to what degree is the U.S. prepared to give the Israelis space and time to operate in an effort to prevent or preempt violations? So I think it's iffy. I think 30 days from now, Richard, we'll have a much better sense as to whether or not we're going to get through the 60-day implementation period. And one additional point, the irony of ironies is if the clock starts tomorrow and you count down 60 days, that would be what, January 26th? Yeah, 7.
So
that's 7 days after Donald Trump is inaugurated. So it may well be that despite his willingness, I think, to see this resolved before he becomes president, he could end up with a crater and a crisis as one of the first acts of his presidency.
Did you heard Jim Shooter a second ago? The ceasefire, it's not a peace, the ceasefire that will exist in the north, what will be the effect on the fighting in Gaza?
I never disagree with Jim Shooter. I think that you had this deal primarily because Benjamin Netanyahu could get it through his government. Right now, he cannot get a deal with Hamas through his government. Hamas is going to demand in exchange for the 101 hostages, dead and alive, 51 living, perhaps, the rest not. They're going to demand an asymmetrical number of Palestinian prisoners that have been accused or convicted of killing Israelis. They're also going to demand a cessation of hostilities and probably the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Netanyahu is not prepared to make those concessions. So I think the odds of a deal in Gaza in the remaining months of the Biden administration, very, very small.
What's your understanding of where Donald Trump actually stands on this? So assuming January the 21st, it's on now his watch. Israel was cock-a-hoop at the prospect of Trump's victory. But what does Trump do? Does he give Netanyahu carte blanche? I don't really understand the mechanism by which Donald Trump's authority transmits down in this sense.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump has no real conception, I would argue, having worked and voted for a Republican and Democrat administration. I could say I don't think Donald Trump has a clear conception of the American national interest. I think his foreign policy is subordinated to his whims and fancies, his financial interests, his political interests, his vanity. I think, though, watching Donald Trump in 1.0, he doesn't like losers and he doesn't like messes. And I suspect that he's already made negative comments over the last year or two about Benjamin Netanyahu not understanding he's got to get this over with quickly. Israel has a huge PR problem. If these conflicts continue, Donald Trump is going to have a large PR problem, and that could mean no small measure of awkwardness and perhaps tension with Netanyahu. And one more point. He's a transactional guy, Donald Trump. He wants an Israeli-Saudi deal, all right? And the only way to even remotely get an Israeli-Saudi deal is if you figure out a way to stop the killing and the suffering in Gaza.
You shame on you, sir. You opened up a can of worms in that last answer that requires me to ask one more question for a yes and no. Does Benjamin Netanyahu, is he transactional enough to want that same deal with Saudi?
Not if it costs him his government and the possibility of a conviction on trial for robbery, fraud, and breach of trust, or a plea bargain that drives him out of politics. An absolute no, if that's what it cost him.
There we go. Thank you, sir. As always, grateful.
Thank you.